When did you permanently shut a corrupt business down? My phone rang and I heard my mom sobbing so hard she could barely speak. Her voice was shaking as she tried to explain what happened at her favorite Polish restaurant downtown, where she'd been eating lunch every Tuesday for the past 5 years. She'd ordered her usual potato and cheese pierogi with extra sour cream when she noticed something dark under the toppings. When she moved the fried onions aside with her fork, she found a dead rat. Not a small piece of something questionable, but an actual rat the size of her hand tangled in the dumplings with its gray fur matted in sour cream, and its tail wrapped around 3 pierogi like it was hugging them. The worst part was how the owners reacted. Instead of apologizing, they surrounded her table like a mob. The manager kept insisting it was just a piece of kielbasa that looked weird under the lighting, while my mom held her plate up, trying to show other customers what she'd found. People at nearby tables were covering their mouths and pushing their own plates away, but the staff kept saying my mom was confused or seeing things. The owner's son actually reached for her plate trying to snatch it away before she could take a photo. My mom was crying harder now, telling me how they were making her feel insane. 4 staff members stood around her table speaking in Polish and laughing like she was some crazy lady making up stories. She felt trapped in that corner booth with them blocking her exit. I told her to take pictures immediately and get out of there no matter what they said. She managed to snap 3 photos while they yelled at her to stop. The owner himself came out of the kitchen and grabbed her phone right out of her hands. His fingers were covered in flour as he deleted the pictures one by one, while she begged him to stop. What he didn't know was that she'd already sent one to me through text while pretending to look for her glasses. The image on my screen made me gag. It was definitely a rat with its pink tail twisted through the pierogi and white sour cream covering its matted fur. You could see its little paws curled up and its eyes were open, staring at nothing. I saved it to 3 different places, immediately knowing we'd need evidence. My mom pushed past them and left without paying while they shouted about calling the police. The owner's wife followed her to the parking lot, screaming in Polish about ruining their business and being a lying witch. My mom drove home with her hands shaking so bad she had to pull over twice. She kept saying maybe she was wrong even though we both had the photo. They'd gaslit her so effectively she was doubting her own eyes. That night, the sickness started. First just nausea, then violent vomiting that wouldn't stop. She called me at 3 a.m., barely able to speak between retching. By 6 a.m., she was so dehydrated she couldn't stand up. I found her on the bathroom floor burning with fever and had to carry her to my car. The ER doctors took one look at her and rushed her to a room. Her fever had spiked to 104 degrees, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. They pumped 3 bags of IV fluids into her while running tests. The doctor pulled me aside and said it was the worst case of food poisoning they'd seen all year. Whatever bacteria was in her system was aggressive and had nearly shut down her kidneys. For 3 days, I sat beside her hospital bed, watching her drift in and out of consciousness. The monitors beeped constantly, and nurses came every hour to check her vitals. She was so sick she didn't even know I was there most of the time. I held her hand and wondered if a plate of pierogi was going to be the thing that killed my mother. On day 2, while she was sleeping, the restaurant actually had the nerve to call my cell phone. The owner's son said they wanted to make things right by offering us a week of free meals. A week of free meals for nearly killing my mother. I told them exactly where they could shove their pierogi. He insisted the rat was impossible because they had a clean kitchen and suggested my mom must have gotten sick from something else she ate that day. Then he actually said maybe she planted the rat herself for attention or to get a free meal. That was the moment I decided to destroy them. I grabbed my phone and started Googling health department numbers while Mom's IV drip kept beeping in the background. The first number I called put me on hold for 20 minutes before transferring me to someone who said they only handled permits. That person sent me to another department that dealt with complaints, but the lady there said I needed the food safety division instead. My hands were shaking as I explained the whole story for the 3rd time to someone who barely seemed to be listening. She transferred me again, and I was ready to throw my phone at the wall when a man answered and said his name was Mateo Duran. He actually stopped me halfway through my story to ask specific questions about the rat and Mom's condition. I told him about the photo, and he asked me to email it right away while we were still talking. I heard him typing on his keyboard, then nothing for maybe 30 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more serious, and he said this was the worst contamination he'd seen in 15 years of doing inspections. He promised to visit the restaurant today and gave me his direct number in case I needed anything else. After hanging up, I went to the nurse's station and asked if I could get copies of all Mom's medical records. The nurse looked at the bruises on Mom's arm from all the IV attempts and nodded like she understood exactly what I was dealing with. She helped me print everything, including the doctor's notes about how bad the poisoning was and how Mom almost went into kidney failure. She even highlighted the parts about the severity and told me she'd seen too many cases like this go nowhere because people didn't keep good records. I thanked her and took the stack of papers back to Mom's room, where I spread them out on the little rolling table. That afternoon, while Mom dozed, I created separate folders on Google Drive, Dropbox, and iCloud with everything we had. The rat photo went in first, then all the medical records I'd just copied. Then I typed up a detailed timeline starting from when Mom called me crying at the restaurant. Every single thing I could remember went into that document, including the exact words the owner's son had said about Mom planting the rat. I even copied the photo onto a USB drive and walked down to the hospital gift shop to buy an envelope and stamps. My cousin Jake lived 3 states away, and I mailed him the USB with a note asking him to keep it safe just in case. Maybe I was being paranoid, but these people had already deleted evidence once and I wasn't taking any chances. My phone rang while I was walking back from the mailbox, and I saw it was the restaurant's number again. The owner's son started talking before I could even say hello, his voice aggressive and loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He said they knew I had the photo, and if I shared it anywhere, they'd sue us for defamation and ruin us financially. I grabbed my personal phone from my pocket and started recording on the voice memo app while he kept ranting. He actually said the words, "We know about the rat photo," which made me want to laugh because he'd just admitted they knew about it. Then he said we were trying to destroy their family business over nothing, and that Mom probably got sick from something else she ate. He threatened to call the police on us for theft since Mom left without paying her bill. I told him to go ahead and call them, then hung up while he was still yelling. Mom woke up when I sat down hard in the chair next to her bed and asked what was wrong. Her voice was weak, but she was more alert than she'd been in days. I explained about the health inspector and the threatening phone call and asked if she was ready to fight these people on every level possible. She looked at the IV in her arm and the monitors tracking her vital signs and nodded slowly. We talked about filing a complaint with the health department, which I'd already started, going to the police about the owner grabbing her phone and deleting evidence, finding a lawyer to sue them and posting everything online so people would know what happened. Mom was scared about making things worse, but she was also angry enough to want them held responsible for nearly killing her. The next morning, I drove to the county building and stood in line at the health department office for 40 minutes. When I finally got to the window, I filed a formal complaint, and the clerk gave me an official case number. She said someone would follow up within 3 business days, but then Mateo called while I was still in the parking lot. He confirmed he was scheduling an emergency inspection for that afternoon, based on what he'd seen in the photo and heard about Mom's condition. Back at the hospital, I went to the lab and requested all of Mom's test results, especially the stool sample they'd taken when she first came in. The technician printed everything, and I saw the results showed salmonella contamination. The doctor had written notes on the report, saying the specific strain was consistent with rodent contamination, which was exactly what I needed to see in writing. I made 3 copies of that report and added it to all my folders. Mom was sitting up in bed when I got back, and she looked stronger, even though she still couldn't eat solid food. I asked if she was ready to talk about filing a police report for when the owner grabbed her phone and deleted the photos. She hesitated and said she was worried about making everything worse, but I reminded her that destroying evidence was actually a crime. The owner had physically taken her property and deleted things from it, which was destruction of property at minimum. Mom thought about it for a few minutes, then agreed we should document everything officially. I called Laura Michelle's law office from the number I'd found online and explained our situation to her assistant. When I mentioned the photo of the rat and how the owner had deleted evidence from Mom's phone, the assistant said Laura would definitely want to hear about this case. She scheduled us for a consultation the following week and asked me to email all our documentation ahead of time so Laura could review it. I spent the rest of that evening typing up everything that happened with the rat photo attached, getting angrier with each word I wrote. The post was 3 pages long by the time I finished, but Laura's assistant had said to wait until after our meeting before going public with anything. My fingers kept hovering over the submit button on Facebook while Mom slept in her hospital bed next to me. I closed my laptop and opened my phone instead, searching for the restaurant's name on every review site I could find. The Yelp page loaded first, and I started scrolling back through years of reviews, taking screenshots of anything that looked important. A woman from 2 years ago said she got food poisoning so bad she missed her daughter's wedding. Another person wrote about finding something gray and fuzzy in their soup, but the staff insisted it was just herbs. Someone else posted about seeing a mouse run across the dining room floor while they were eating. 3 different people mentioned getting sick in the past 6 months alone. I saved every single screenshot to multiple folders on my phone and laptop, making sure nothing would get lost. The reviews went back 5 years, and I read every single one, finding 7 total mentions of people getting sick or seeing signs of pests. Mom woke up briefly to use the bathroom, and I had to help her walk the 10 feet because she was still so weak. The nurse came in to check her IV and said she might be able to go home tomorrow if her fever stayed down. I barely slept that night in the uncomfortable hospital chair, waking up every time a monitor beeped or a nurse came in. The next morning, the doctor said Mom could leave, but she'd need constant care for at least a week. We stopped at the pharmacy on the way home, and the pharmacist's eyes got wide when he saw all the prescriptions. 5 different medications, including 2 types of antibiotics, something for nausea, something for dehydration, and pills to help her stomach heal. The total came to $300 even with insurance, and I had to put it on my credit card. Mom could barely walk from the car to her front door, and I had to basically carry her up the steps. I set up a whole system in her bedroom with all the medications labeled with times and doses, water bottles everywhere, and a notebook to track when she took what. She fell asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow, and I sat in her kitchen making a schedule for the next week. My phone rang while I was writing, and Mateo's name showed up on the screen. He told me his inspection that afternoon had found major problems, including food stored at wrong temperatures and mouse droppings in the storage area near the kitchen. The restaurant was getting shut down for at least 3 days while they fixed everything and did a deep clean. He said he'd found evidence of pest activity in multiple areas and gaps in the walls where rodents could get in. The owners had been given a list of violations 2 pages long and would face thousands of dollars in fines. I was taking notes on everything he said when my phone beeped with another call coming in. The voicemail notification popped up a minute later, and when I played it, I heard the owner's son screaming about how we destroyed their business. He said we'd pay for causing the inspection and making them close, that his family had been running that restaurant for 20 years and we were trying to ruin them over nothing. His voice got louder as he yelled that we were liars and criminals who would be hearing from their lawyer. I saved the voicemail immediately and sent a copy to my email just to be safe. That night after Mom was asleep, I finally posted our story on Yelp with the rat photo and every detail about what happened. Within an hour, Yelp had removed it, saying it violated their content guidelines about graphic images. I tried again on Google Reviews, and the same thing happened, removed within 2 hours. The frustration made me want to throw my laptop across the room, but I tried Facebook instead, posting in a local food safety group. Before it got taken down, someone had already shared it to the main city Facebook group, and suddenly my phone was blowing up with notifications. Dozens of people were commenting with their own stories about getting sick at that restaurant, or seeing things that made them leave without ordering. But then the restaurant's supporters showed up too, saying we were making everything up to get money, and that this was discrimination against Polish immigrants. People were arguing in the comments, calling each other names and posting angry messages. Someone even found my personal profile and started messaging me directly with threats. The health department called the next morning to schedule their follow-up inspection, and the woman on the phone mentioned they'd gotten over 30 complaints in the past 2 days. She couldn't officially confirm they were about the same restaurant, but her tone made it pretty clear. The deeper inspection happened 3 days later, and Mateo called me afterward with the results. They'd found temperature violations with meat stored too warm and vegetables kept at unsafe levels. The pest control measures were basically non-existent, with no records of professional treatment in over a year. But they hadn't found any active rats in the kitchen itself, which was disappointing even though the other violations were serious. He assured me the fines would be huge, and they'd have to fix everything before reopening. A week later, Mom's test results finally came back from the lab with definitive proof of salmonella contamination. The infection disease doctor at the hospital wrote an official letter saying the specific strain was consistent with exposure to rodent fecal matter. I made 10 copies of that letter and saved digital versions everywhere I could think of. Laura called that afternoon to say she was officially taking our case after reviewing all the evidence I'd sent. She immediately sent something called a preservation letter to the restaurant, requiring them to keep all their records, receipts, security footage, and any other evidence. She explained that the owner deleting Mom's photos showed consciousness of guilt, which would help our case significantly. My phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone named Carlos Boone while I was still on the call with Laura. He said he used to work at the restaurant and quit 6 months ago because of the rats they refused to deal with. His message was full of typos, like he was typing fast and scared someone would see. He said he couldn't go public but wanted to help if I promised to keep his name out of it. I messaged him back immediately asking if we could meet, and he suggested a coffee shop across town the next morning. Laura said getting a former employee to talk would be huge for our case, even if he stayed anonymous. I barely slept that night thinking about what Carlos might tell me. The coffee shop was one of those trendy places with exposed brick and too many plants. Carlos was already there in a back corner booth, looking around nervously every few seconds. He was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with dark circles under his eyes. He started talking before I even sat down, saying he felt guilty for not reporting what he saw sooner. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through photos from when he worked there. The first one showed mouse droppings scattered across a prep counter next to a pile of onions. Another showed a hole in the wall behind the freezer big enough to stick your finger through. The worst was a video of something moving in a bag of flour that made my stomach turn. Carlos said he showed these to the owner who just told him to clean it up and not make a big deal. He said they'd sweep the droppings into the trash and keep cooking like nothing happened. One time, he found a dead mouse in the storage room, and the manager just threw it out and sprayed some bleach around. Carlos quit when he saw rat droppings in the pierogi filling, and the owner's son told him to pick them out and use it anyway. He was shaking as he transferred the photos to my phone using AirDrop. I asked if he'd signed something for our lawyer, and he said maybe, but he was scared of getting sued. His new job barely paid the bills, and he couldn't afford any legal problems. I promised we'd protect him, and Laura would make sure he stayed anonymous in any documents. He left through the back door, still looking over his shoulder. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and the woman said she was Heidi Combs from Channel 7 News. She'd heard about our story from someone in the Facebook group before it got deleted. She wanted to interview Mom about what happened and maybe use our photo on the evening news. I told her we needed to check with our lawyer first about media strategy. She said she understood but gave me her direct cell number in case we decided to go public. Mom was getting worse at home, not better like we'd hoped. She tried to eat some plain toast that morning but threw it right back up. Her hands shook when she looked at any food, and she kept checking everything for bugs. She'd lost 12 pounds already, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. She woke up screaming about rats in her bed, and I'd find her in the kitchen at 3 a.m. checking all the cabinets. The panic attack started whenever she tried to eat anything besides white rice or saltine crackers. Her doctor prescribed anxiety medication, but it made her too drowsy to function. I finally convinced her we needed to file a police report about the owner grabbing her phone and deleting evidence. The officer who came to the house actually took it seriously when I showed him the threatening voicemails from the owner's son. He said it showed a pattern of intimidation that would strengthen any criminal case. He took down everything in his notebook and gave us a case number for our records. Mom cried the whole time she gave her statement, but the officer was patient and kind. Mateo called the next day saying the health department was scheduling another inspection based on all the new complaints. He couldn't say exactly how many, but his voice suggested it was a lot. He mentioned that finding problems across multiple inspections would help them take permanent action against the restaurant. The property management company that owned the building called me after the health department contacted them. The property manager said 2 other tenants had been complaining about rats in the shared walls for months. A clothing store next door found droppings in their storage room, and the insurance office upstairs heard scratching in the ceiling. This was bigger than just the restaurant and involved the whole building. The management company was launching their own investigation and might evict the restaurant if the problem continued. That's when the restaurant went on the offensive with a long Facebook post calling everything a hoax. They said we were trying to extort money from a family business and destroy their reputation. They claimed the photo was fake and Mom made everything up for attention. They even suggested we were racist against Polish immigrants trying to make an honest living. I screenshot the whole post immediately, knowing their public denial would hurt them in court. Laura called within an hour saying their Facebook post was a gift to our case. She said we needed to be careful about any public response, though, and stick to provable facts only. She told me to avoid emotional language that their lawyer could use against us later. It was hard to stay calm when they were calling Mom a liar while she could barely eat. That night, someone anonymous sent me an email with security footage attached. The video showed the alley behind the restaurant with a clear view of their dumpster area. Rats were running in and out of gaps around the dumpster and climbing up the walls. The timestamp showed it was from last week, proving the problem was still happening right now. I forwarded the video to Laura and Mateo within minutes, and both of them called back excited about having current proof of the problem. Heidi came to our house the next afternoon with her camera crew and set up lights in our living room to make Mom's face stay in shadows while she talked. Mom sat on our couch with her hands shaking as she told the whole story from the beginning, and when she got to the part about them making her feel crazy, she started crying. So hard the crew had to stop filming for 10 minutes. She kept saying she knew what she saw, but they made her doubt herself, and the camera guy had to wipe his own eyes when she described being surrounded at her table. Heidi asked gentle questions about the hospital stay, and Mom showed the scars on her arms from all the IV lines they had to put in when her veins kept collapsing from dehydration. The interview took 3 hours, because Mom needed breaks to calm down, and Heidi said the raw emotion would really connect with viewers when it aired. 2 days later, Mateo called me from his personal phone, not his work one, and said he couldn't officially tell me this, but they'd gotten 7 new complaints since our story went public on social media. He said when that many people come forward at once, it usually means the problem has been going on for years, and people were just too scared or embarrassed to report it before. He couldn't give me names or details, but said the complaints went back 18 months and included 2 other people who got sick enough to need medical care. Carlos texted me that night saying he'd thought about it and would give Laura a sworn statement about what he saw when he worked there, as long as his name stayed private. I drove to meet him at a park where nobody would see us, and he told me about finding rat droppings in the flower bins and the owners just sifting them out instead of throwing the whole batch away. He said he took pictures on his phone before he quit, and still had them saved, which made my stomach turn, thinking about all the people who ate food made with that contaminated flour. Laura called him the next morning and took his statement over the phone while recording it, and she said his testimony about them knowing about the rats for months was exactly what we needed to prove negligence. The health department scheduled their follow-up inspection for that Thursday and didn't tell the restaurant ahead of time like they usually do for routine checks. Mateo couldn't tell me what they found officially, but he called that afternoon and just said we should watch the news that night because there would be a story about downtown restaurant closures. The news showed the health department notice taped to the restaurant's front door, ordering immediate closure for critical violations and requiring professional pest control before they could reopen. The report said inspectors found fresh rat droppings in the dry storage area and gnaw marks on food packaging, plus evidence of nesting materials behind the freezer. The owner stood outside yelling at the news cameras that it was all lies and discrimination, but you could see his own employees in the background looking relieved the place was finally shut down. The next morning, about 20 people showed up outside the health department with signs saying the city was targeting immigrant businesses, and the whole thing was about racism, not food safety. I watched from across the street feeling sick as they twisted everything into us being the bad guys trying to destroy a family, just trying to make a living. The protesters included some regular customers who said they'd eaten there for years without problems, and this was all blown out of proportion by one crazy woman trying to get money. My phone started ringing, and it was my company's HR director asking me to come in for a meeting that afternoon about my social media activity. She sat me down in a conference room and pulled up printouts of my Facebook posts about the restaurant and said, while she understood this was personal, I needed to be careful about what I posted while employed there. She said the company had gotten calls from people saying I was using my position to destroy a local business, and they needed to protect their reputation by keeping employees from controversial public statements. I explained about Mom nearly dying, but she just kept saying I needed to think about how my actions reflected on the company and consider taking the posts down. The stress of fighting on so many fronts was making me lose sleep, and I'd started checking our doors were locked 3 times before bed, worried about retaliation. Laura filed our civil lawsuit the next week, asking for damages for negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and destruction of evidence when the owner deleted Mom's photos. The process server went to the restaurant while they were doing their mandated deep cleaning and handed the papers to the owner right in front of his whole staff and the cleaning crew. Laura said the owner turned red and started screaming in Polish, but legally he'd been served and now had 30 days to respond to our complaint. Within a week, their lawyer filed a countersuit claiming we'd orchestrated everything to destroy their business and were guilty of defamation and intentional interference with their livelihood. Laura laughed when she read it and said this was standard intimidation tactics that defendants always try to judges see right through it, but it still made my chest tight thinking about being sued ourselves. She said we had truth as our defense and not to worry, but I spent hours going through all our evidence again, making sure we could prove everything we'd said publicly. Heidi called to say the news segment was ready and would air Thursday night at 6 and 11, and she thought we'd be happy with how balanced but powerful it came out. That night, we sat in front of the TV and watched as Mom's interview played with her face shadowed, but her voice clear, as she described what happened and how they tried to gaslight her. They showed the health inspection reports on screen and played Carlos's statement with his voice disguised while showing the photos he'd taken of droppings in the flower bins 6 months ago. The segment included a statement from the restaurant, calling it all lies, but Heidi's reporting just laid out facts without taking sides, which made our case look even stronger. My phone started buzzing immediately with supportive messages, but within an hour, the harassment started too, with people finding my LinkedIn profile and sending messages calling me a liar and worse. Someone found my work email and sent a message to my boss saying I was a racist trying to destroy immigrants and should be fired immediately. I spent the whole night documenting every threat and adjusting my privacy settings on every platform, but felt constantly on edge knowing these people were looking for ways to hurt us. 2 weeks later, Laura called to say we had our preliminary hearing about the restaurant's request for a gag order to stop us from talking publicly about the case. The courthouse downtown was old with marble floors that made every footstep echo, and Mom gripped my arm tight as we walked to the courtroom. The owner and his son sat at a table across from us with their lawyer, who kept shuffling papers and whispering to them while we waited for the judge. When the judge came in, everyone stood and she looked tired already, like she'd heard too many cases that morning. Their lawyer stood up first and talked for 10 minutes about how our social media posts were destroying their business and making it impossible to get a fair trial if this went to court. He showed printed screenshots of my Facebook posts and the news coverage, and kept saying we were trying the case in public instead of the courtroom. Laura stood up next and explained that everything we'd posted was factual and protected by the First Amendment and that they couldn't silence us just because the truth hurt their business. The judge looked at both sides for a long moment, then said she wouldn't grant the gag order, but warned everyone that any public statements that might prejudice a potential jury could have consequences later. She specifically looked at me when she said that inflammatory posts could hurt our own case if this went to trial. Walking out of the courthouse, the weight of this legal fight really hit me for the first time. This wasn't just about posting online anymore, but actual court proceedings that could take years. 3 days later, Mom called me crying from the bathroom floor again. She hadn't been able to keep anything down for 4 days straight, and was so weak she couldn't stand up without the room spinning. I drove over and found her curled up next to the toilet, looking worse than she had in weeks with her skin gray and her lips cracked from dehydration. The emergency room nurses recognized us from before, and immediately got her into a bed with an IV running. The doctor said her digestive system was still damaged from the original poisoning, and any stress made it worse, which meant the legal fight was literally making her sick again. Watching them pump fluids into her while she lay there with her eyes closed reminded me exactly why we couldn't just let this go. The next morning, while Mom was still in the hospital, Laura called with news that the health department had released their full inspection reports to the public. The document showed the restaurant was on probation with mandatory monthly inspections for the next year, and detailed all the violations they'd found, including the rodent droppings and improper food storage. They were allowed to reopen, but under strict monitoring with surprise inspections possible at any time. Laura said this public record would help our case, since it proved the health violations were real and not something we made up. She forwarded me the documents, and I spent an hour reading through every page highlighting the worst parts. 2 weeks after that came the depositions, where both sides had to answer questions under oath, with a court reporter typing everything down. The owner's son went first, and Laura grilled him for 3 hours about their pest control practices and what they knew about rodents in the restaurant. He kept trying to dodge the questions, but finally admitted they'd occasionally seen signs of mice or rats, but always dealt with it right away by putting out traps. Laura made him repeat that admission twice to make sure the court reporter got it clearly. She told me afterward that admission was huge, because it proved they knew about the rodent problem before Mom got sick. My deposition was the next day, and their lawyer tried to make me look like I was just after money, but Laura had prepared me well, and I stuck to the facts about Mom's illness and the photo evidence. A month passed with lawyers going back and forth filing motions and doing discovery, which meant requesting documents from each other. Laura called one afternoon and said we needed to talk about our options going forward. She explained that taking this to trial could cost us $50,000 or more in legal fees, and might not happen for 2 years with all the delays and scheduling issues. She recommended we consider mediation, where both sides would meet with a neutral person to try to work out a settlement without going to court. The thought of settling made my chest tight with anger after everything they'd put Mom through, but I could see she had a point about the time and money. When I talked to Mom about it later, she was lying on the couch, still too weak to eat much besides soup and crackers. She said she was exhausted from the whole fight and just wanted to focus on getting better instead of spending years in courtrooms. 2 days later, the restaurant's insurance company made their first settlement offer through their lawyer. They offered to pay all of Mom's medical bills plus $30,000 if we signed an NDA agreeing never to talk about the case publicly again. Laura said it was insulting compared to what Mom went through with nearly dying and months of suffering, but Mom seemed to be considering it just to make everything stop. She told me that night she didn't have the energy for a long court battle, and maybe we should just take whatever we could get and move on with our lives. I understood her exhaustion, but hated the idea of them basically buying their way out of this with just an insurance payout, while they kept serving food to people. The next day I met with Heidi at a coffee shop to ask what would happen to the news coverage if we signed an NDA. She explained that the health department violations were public record, so those could still be reported, but our personal story, including Mom finding the rat and getting sick, would be completely off limits if we signed. She said the restaurant would probably use the NDA to claim the whole thing was overblown, since we couldn't talk about it anymore. Laura scheduled mediation for the following week at a neutral law office downtown. The mediator was a retired judge who spent the first hour meeting with each side separately to understand what we wanted. When we all sat down together, the owner wouldn't even look at Mom and kept whispering to his lawyer in Polish. The mediator went back and forth between our rooms for 6 hours, carrying offers and counteroffers. We pushed for more than just money, including mandatory food safety training for all their staff and quarterly health inspections for 2 years, instead of just monthly for 1 year. The owners resisted every additional requirement, saying we were trying to destroy their business, but the mediator reminded them that going to trial would cost them more and might result in worse outcomes. By late afternoon, we'd negotiated up to $50,000 plus medical expenses, and they'd agreed to the additional safety requirements and inspections. The final sticking point was that Mom wanted a written apology from the owner himself, admitting they handled things wrong. Their lawyer said absolutely not at first, but when we threatened to walk away from mediation and go to trial, they came back with an agreement for a private letter of apology that wouldn't be made public. Laura said it was a decent settlement considering the alternatives, and Mom was ready to be done with everything, so we agreed to accept it. The paperwork took another week to finalize, with both sides going back and forth on exact wording, but eventually we signed the settlement agreement in Laura's office with all the provisions we'd negotiated. The check from their insurance company came 3 weeks later and covered every single medical bill plus $50,000 extra for Mom's ongoing care and therapy sessions. I deposited it at the bank and watched our account balance go from almost nothing to finally stable after months of stress and unpaid bills. The restaurant posted something on their Facebook page about always striving for excellence and implementing new safety protocols, but never mentioned the rat or what they did to Mom. People in the comments seemed to know something had happened, though, because half of them were asking questions, while the other half defended the owners like they were family. I started going to therapy myself because I couldn't stop checking every piece of food I ate and had dreams about finding rats in my cereal bowl. The therapist's office smelled like vanilla candles, and she had me write down all my angry thoughts in a notebook instead of posting them online. Mom was finally eating more than just rice and toast, but still couldn't handle anything from restaurants without her hands shaking. She'd stand in the kitchen making her own meals from scratch and measuring every ingredient like she was doing chemistry experiments. The detective called to say they weren't going to charge the owner for grabbing Mom's phone because the settlement made it not worth pursuing. I hung up feeling disappointed, but not surprised since the whole system seemed designed to protect businesses over people. Mateo sent me the health department's final report, showing the restaurant had paid all their fines and was passing their monthly inspections now. The report had photos of their newly sealed walls and industrial pest control equipment that should have been there all along. Mom went to her friend's backyard barbecue last weekend and actually ate a hamburger without having a panic attack. She sat at the picnic table laughing with everyone and only checked her food twice before taking a bite. I kept all our evidence in 3 different cloud folders and on 2 external hard drives just in case we ever needed it again. Every few weeks, I'd check the restaurant's latest inspection reports online to make sure they were staying clean. Part of me still wanted to see them shut down completely, but I was learning to focus on Mom getting better instead of revenge. She'd gained back 5 of the 12 pounds she lost and could sleep through the night without nightmares, most of the time. The restaurant stayed open, and people kept eating there like nothing had happened, which made my chest tight whenever I drove past. Their parking lot was always full on Friday nights, and I'd see families walking in not knowing what had happened to Mom in that corner booth. I thought about standing outside with the rat photo warning people, but my therapist said that wouldn't help anyone heal. Mom started making pierogies at home using her grandmother's recipe, and they were better than anything that restaurant ever served. She'd make huge batches and freeze them in portions, so she always had safe food ready to eat. The owner never sent the apology letter he promised in the settlement, but Laura said pursuing it would cost more than it was worth. I deleted the restaurant's number from my phone and stopped reading their Facebook page because it just made me angry. Mom joined a support group for people with food trauma and met others who understood why she couldn't eat at restaurants anymore. The group met at the library every Tuesday, which was the same day she used to eat at that Polish place. She came home from meetings looking stronger and talking about maybe trying a food truck someday when she felt ready. I organized all the medical records and legal documents into a filing cabinet in my closet and tried not to look at them. The local news did a follow-up story about restaurant inspections in general, without mentioning our case because of the NDA. Heidi interviewed the health department supervisor who talked about new inspection protocols while I watched, knowing we'd caused those changes. Mom made dinner for both of us every Sunday now, and we'd eat together at her kitchen table talking about anything except food safety. She was getting better 1 meal at a time, even if she'd never be the same person who trusted restaurants completely. I stopped driving past the restaurant on purpose and took different routes to avoid seeing their stupid neon sign. The anger was still there, but it didn't burn as hot as it used to when I thought about what they did. Mom was alive and getting stronger every day, which mattered more than destroying their business completely. I learned to be okay with imperfect justice, because perfect justice would have meant Mom never got sick at all. Well, that was definitely a journey to share with you all. Kinda makes you look at things a little differently, right? Thanks for sticking around with me. Like the video, it helps more than you think.